My brothers and sisters, have you ever wondered why as your faith grows stronger, you start to feel more distant from the world around you? You no longer fit into the same gatherings, the same conversations, the same lifestyle, and people begin to say you are disappearing. But in reality, you are not disappearing. You are protecting your soul. You are walking away from what displeases Allah and walking closer to Him. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Glad tidings to the strangers." Who are these strangers? They are the believers who feel isolated, who don't blend in with sin, who choose Allah even if it means losing friends, losing status, or standing alone. So if you feel like you are disappearing from society, don't see it as a loss. See it as Allah separating you from the dunya to bring you closer to Him, because sometimes being unseen by people is the very reason you are seen by Allah. 1. Faith sets you apart. Faith, my brothers and sisters, is not just a belief in the heart. It is a light that guides your actions, your speech, and your choices. And when that light shines brightly, it naturally sets you apart from those who choose darkness. Allah says in the Qur'an, Allah is the ally of those who believe. He brings them out from darknesses into the light. 2:257. This transition into light often means walking a different path from the majority. As your faith grows, you begin to see the world differently. What others celebrate may trouble your heart, and what they neglect becomes precious to you. My beloved brothers and sisters, sometimes in life you may feel that the more you grow in your faith, the more you become distant from people, gatherings, and lifestyles you once enjoyed. You start to feel alone, as though you no longer belong. But remember, it is not loneliness, it is Allah drawing you closer to Him. The Prophet told us, "Glad tidings to the strangers." These are the ones who choose faith over popularity, Allah over society, and the hereafter over this temporary world. So never feel sad when you are left out, because Allah Himself is pulling you out of darkness into light. Faith naturally sets believers apart from the majority, because when the light of Iman enters the heart, it transforms the way a person sees life, values, and purpose. Suddenly, what once felt normal begins to feel heavy, and what once seemed enjoyable begins to feel empty. The gatherings where backbiting, gossip, and vain talk take place no longer bring joy. Rather, they bring discomfort to the soul. The heart starts to crave purity, sincerity, and the remembrance of Allah. Faith is not just a word, nor is it something confined to rituals. It is a living light that shines in the way you speak, the way you dress, the way you think, the way you treat others, and the choices you make every single day. This light cannot be hidden, because it manifests outwardly, and others begin to notice that you are different. They might say you are too strict, too serious, or even old-fashioned. But in reality, you are walking a path of clarity, while many others are wandering in darkness. Allah tells us in the Qur'an that He is the protector and ally of those who believe, and He takes them out from layers of darkness into light. This means that as faith grows, it distances you from practices, lifestyles, and environments that displease Allah, and naturally, that separation creates a visible difference between you and those who choose to remain in heedlessness. It is not that you are better than them, but your priorities change because the hereafter becomes more real to you than this fleeting world. You begin to measure success not by wealth or popularity, but by obedience and closeness to Allah. When this shift happens, you stand out, because most of society is still chasing temporary pleasures. Throughout history, the true believers were always few in number compared to the masses. The prophets themselves, the greatest examples of humanity, often had only a small group of followers. Prophet Nuh in the 7 Leafy preached for centuries, and yet only a handful accepted his call. Prophet Ibrahim Ififi stood against his entire community when they worshipped idols. Prophet Muhammad and his companions faced rejection, mockery, and persecution simply because they chose truth over falsehood. Their faith set them apart, but their difference was their honor. The path of Iman has always been a path of distinction, and walking it means accepting that you will not always fit in with the crowd. When you embrace faith fully, you realize that blending into every social trend or lifestyle is no longer possible, because many of those trends clash with the values of Islam. You cannot laugh at the same jokes, celebrate the same sins, or follow the same desires as everyone else, because your heart is connected to Allah. Sometimes this separation hurts, especially when it involves family, friends, or people you grew up with. But the pain is temporary, while the reward of choosing Allah over society is eternal. Faith builds resilience, it teaches patience, and it reminds you that true companionship is not with the majority, but with those who walk the path of righteousness, even if they are few in number. Isolation from sin is actually protection of the soul, because when Allah guides a person, He places in their heart a natural discomfort towards what displeases Him. What once felt normal begins to feel burdensome, and what once seemed entertaining now feels harmful. This sense of unease is not weakness, it is a shield. It is Allah placing a barrier between you and that which could corrupt your heart. Sometimes people mistake this isolation as loneliness or even as loss, but in reality it is the soul being safeguarded from poison. Just as the body rejects harmful food, the purified heart rejects harmful environments. This is why gatherings filled with gossip, arrogance, indecency, and disobedience feel suffocating to a believer whose faith is alive. Walking away from such places is not abandonment of life, it is preservation of life, because the soul is far more delicate and precious than we realize. When a believer distances themselves from sin, it may cause others to misunderstand or even ridicule them. They may accuse you of being antisocial, too religious, or judgmental simply because you refuse to join in. But this refusal is not about arrogance or thinking you are better. It is about protecting the trust Allah has given you in your heart. Every time you choose not to participate in something that displeases Allah, you are building a shield around your soul. Each act of avoidance strengthens your spiritual defenses and weakens the pull of temptation. What looks like isolation from the outside is in fact an inner strengthening process. It is like pulling away from a fire not because you dislike warmth, but because you recognize the flames will burn you. Allah reminds us in the Qur'an that the life of this world is full of deception. Its attractions can blind the eyes and harden the heart, leading people to chase desires without realizing the harm they bring. But those who are guided see through this deception. They recognize that not every smile is sincere, not every invitation is safe, and not every enjoyment is worth the cost of their hereafter. By stepping away, they are not rejecting life, they are choosing a better life, one filled with tranquility and purity of the heart. The Prophet taught us that there is a piece of flesh in the body, and if it is sound, the entire body is sound, but if it is corrupt, the entire body is corrupt, and that is the heart. Protecting the heart from sin is the greatest form of self-care, even if it requires being alone. Look at the companions of the Prophet, who often had to turn away from the gatherings of their people. They were mocked for leaving idols, ridiculed for rejecting false celebrations, and sometimes abandoned by their own families for refusing to partake in sinful practices. Yet their isolation became their protection, because Allah elevated them and gave them honor in this world and the next. Their example shows us that walking away is not weakness but strength, not loss but gain, not rejection but selection by Allah to preserve the purity of the heart. The Prophet praised the strangers who choose Allah over society, because their path is not an easy one. When the Messenger of Allah said, "Glad tidings to the strangers," he was acknowledging the reality that true believers will often feel out of place in the world. These strangers are not strange because they are odd or irrelevant, but because their values, choices, and way of life differ from the majority. They are strange because they stand for modesty in a world that glorifies shamelessness, for honesty in a world that celebrates deceit, for sincerity in a world driven by appearances, and for faith in a world obsessed with material gain. What sets them apart is not weakness, but strength, because it takes courage to walk against the current, when everyone else is flowing with it. The Prophet gave these believers glad tidings to remind them that their isolation is not a curse, but a blessing. It is a sign that they are walking in the footsteps of the prophets and the righteous who came before them. Each prophet was considered strange in his time, because he called people to abandon what was popular and return to what was true. He was mocked for building an ark when there was no sign of a flood. Ibrahim he was considered strange for breaking idols that everyone else worshipped. Musa was called strange for challenging the might of Pharaoh. Isa Huda was considered strange for calling people back to pure worship, and our beloved Prophet Muhammad was called a madman, a sorcerer, and a poet simply because he brought a message of truth. To be strange in the path of Allah is to share in the legacy of the prophets, and that is an honor greater than any worldly acceptance. The glad tidings are also a source of comfort, because the road of the stranger is filled with tests. Friends may drift away, society may label them, and even family may not understand their choices. Yet Allah promises reward beyond imagination for those who remain steadfast. The Prophet said that Islam began as something strange, and it will return to being strange, so blessed are the strangers. These words remind us that being different in faith is not a sign of failure, but a sign of success. The believer's strangeness is evidence that they are holding on to something precious, while others let it slip away. In reality, the world respects those who live with principle, even if they disagree with them. Deep down, people admire the stranger who refuses to compromise their values for temporary approval. Their presence becomes a silent reminder that there is another way to live, a way not bound by trends and desires, but guided by the eternal light of revelation. This is why the Prophet encouraged us to embrace that strangeness rather than fear it. It is not isolation, it is distinction, and with it comes Allah's special mercy, protection, and glad tidings that the sacrifices made today will shine brightly in the hereafter. What the world celebrates may trouble a believer's heart, because the vision of the believer is not the same as the vision of one who is distant from Allah. When faith fills the heart, the scales of judgment change completely. Where others find pride in wealth, fame, and status, the believer sees the danger of arrogance and heedlessness. Where others find entertainment in sin, the believer feels the heaviness of guilt and the fear of displeasing Allah. This is not because the believer does not enjoy life, but because their definition of joy is linked to purity, modesty, and obedience. The very things that make society clap and cheer often bring sorrow to the one whose heart is alive with faith, because they recognize the harm behind the glitter. Look at how the world praises those who accumulate wealth without regard for whether it is halal or haram. They are celebrated, envied, and admired, yet the believer sees that wealth can become a source of accountability on the day of judgment, if not earned and spent correctly. Society glorifies shamelessness and calls it freedom, while the believer sees the loss of modesty and the destruction of dignity. Popular culture thrives on music, gossip, scandals, and indulgence, yet the believer feels unease because they know every word uttered, every act done, will be written and presented before Allah. This disconnect creates a type of quiet pain, because the believer sees what others cannot see, and their heart aches when truth is mocked and falsehood is celebrated. The Qur'an describes the believers as those who avoid vain talk and idle pastimes, those who guard their tongues, their gaze, and their actions. It is not that they cannot laugh or enjoy themselves, but their enjoyment is rooted in what brings real peace to the heart. When they hear others joke about sin, they cannot join in, because to them, sin is not a laughing matter. When they witness people wasting hours in heedlessness, their heart calls them to remembrance of Allah. This often leads to feeling different or even out of place, but it is this very difference that protects their heart from becoming hardened. The Prophet taught that there will come a time when holding on to faith will feel like holding a burning coal. In such times, people will call good evil and evil good. People will cheer for what displeases Allah and mock those who stand for truth. We live in times where immorality is displayed openly, where disobedience is packaged as success, and where the more a person distances themselves from Allah, the more they are celebrated by the world. For the believer, this is not a reason to despair, but a reminder that the world's applause is meaningless if it comes at the cost of Allah's displeasure. Their heart cannot rejoice in something that distances people from their Creator, and their soul cannot celebrate what brings destruction in the hereafter. The true believer measures every celebration by one standard: will this bring me closer to Allah, or take me further away? If it takes them further away, no amount of laughter, clapping, or worldly recognition can erase the unease they feel inside. Their heart remains restless in the face of false joy, because real joy lies only in the remembrance of Allah, in obedience to Him, and in walking a path that leads to eternal happiness, rather than temporary applause. Being unseen by people can mean being seen by Allah, because often the most sincere acts of worship are those done away from the eyes of others. Society measures worth by visibility, by recognition, by the number of people who notice and applaud what you do, but Allah measures worth by sincerity, by the purity of intention, by the actions carried out in secret with no desire for praise. When a believer chooses to step away from gatherings of sin, they may go unnoticed, and when they sacrifice worldly opportunities for the sake of Allah, no one may applaud, but Allah sees it all. His gaze is more valuable than the eyes of the entire world, because when Allah sees you, He elevates you, even if people ignore you. The Qur'an reminds us that Allah is fully aware of what is hidden in the hearts. He knows the intentions behind every decision, whether people acknowledge them or not. Sometimes the believer feels invisible, sidelined, or forgotten by society, but this invisibility is a protection. It shields them from arrogance, from the temptation of showing off, from the corruption that comes with constant validation. The angels record every quiet act of patience, every silent tear shed in prayer, every sacrifice made behind closed doors. While people overlook it, Allah records it, and that record will shine on the day of judgment, when public applause means nothing. History is full of examples of believers whose lives went unnoticed by their societies, but whose names are remembered by Allah and His Messenger. The companions of the Prophet included men and women who were never wealthy, never famous, never powerful in worldly terms, but their sincerity made them giants in faith. There were those who freed slaves quietly, who gave charity in secret, who prayed in the depths of the night while others slept. Their names may not have been known by kings or rulers, but they are known in the heavens. This is the honor of being seen by Allah even when unseen by people. In our time, people chase visibility through social media, through recognition, through trying to prove their worth in the eyes of others. But the believer understands that being hidden can be a gift. When people do not see you, you are freer to act purely for Allah. When people do not praise you, your heart is less likely to seek their approval. And when people forget you, you are reminded that your true audience is Allah alone. The Prophet taught that among the most beloved deeds to Allah are those done consistently, even if small. Many of these deeds happen quietly, without anyone noticing, but their weight with Allah is greater than the loudest achievements celebrated by the world. So when a believer feels overlooked or forgotten, they remind themselves that this is not a loss. To be unseen by people is not to be insignificant. The true value of a life is not how many people remember your name, but how often Allah's mercy descends upon you, because of your sincerity. Being invisible in the dunya can be a sign that you are luminous in the sight of Allah. And while the world may pass you by without acknowledgement, Allah never overlooks even the smallest deed done for His sake. Feeling alone in society is often a sign of closeness to Allah, because the path of faith has never been the popular path, and walking it requires the courage to step away from what everyone else is doing. When a believer begins to prioritize their relationship with Allah, their choices begin to look different from the choices of those around them. They might decline invitations that involve sin. They might dress in a way that reflects modesty, while others follow fashion. They might guard their tongue in conversations filled with gossip, and they might choose to spend their nights in prayer, while others spend them in entertainment. These differences make them stand out, and standing out often feels like standing alone. But that very feeling of being separate is one of the strongest signs that Allah is drawing them nearer to Him, removing distractions, and carving out a path that leads directly to His pleasure. The Prophet told us that glad tidings are for the strangers, those who remain steadfast when people turn away from obedience. Islam itself began as something strange, and it will return to being strange, and the ones who hold on to it in those times of strangeness are the ones who earn the glad tidings of Allah. This means that when the world takes a direction that distances people from their Creator, those who remain true to Allah's guidance will naturally feel different, and that difference is not a weakness, it is a badge of honor. Being alone in a crowd of disobedience is better than being lost in it. Feeling isolated while holding on to truth is better than feeling accepted while drowning in falsehood. Closeness to Allah often requires letting go of the attachments that tie the heart to the dunya. This is why believers sometimes feel the pain of loneliness, because they have to walk away from certain circles, from certain friendships, from certain lifestyles that once felt comfortable, but no longer align with their faith. This separation can feel like loss, but in reality, it is Allah exchanging something temporary for something eternal. It is Allah purifying the believer's heart from distractions, and preparing them for a deeper connection with Him. Many times, the moments when you feel most unseen by people are the very moments when you are most seen by Allah. The silence of being alone becomes filled with the sweetness of His remembrance. The absence of worldly company becomes replaced by the tranquility of prayer, by the serenity of dua, and by the closeness of knowing that Allah is listening to you when no one else is. Throughout history, the people most beloved to Allah often walked a lonely path. The prophets were rejected by their communities, mocked by their people, and even opposed by their own families. Yet in those moments of isolation, Allah granted them strength, patience, and victory. Prophet Ibrahim DTF stood alone against his entire city when they worshipped idols. Yet Allah called him an entire nation because of his unwavering faith. Prophet Musa Destafi felt abandoned when his people turned against him, yet Allah spoke directly to him on Mount Sinai. Prophet Muhammad was boycotted, insulted, and driven out of his home, but in those moments of solitude, he received the most powerful revelations that continue to guide humanity until today. Their loneliness was never emptiness, it was filled with divine closeness, with the comfort of Allah's companionship, and with the assurance that standing with Him, even if alone, is better than standing with millions without Him. For the believer today, the same principle applies. You may feel left out when gatherings revolve around things that displease Allah, but your absence from them is your protection. You may feel misunderstood when you speak the truth, while others choose silence, but your words are written by the angels even if no one appreciates them. You may feel ignored when you uphold modesty in a world that glorifies shamelessness, but your modesty is seen by Allah who promises immense reward. Each moment of isolation becomes a sign that your loyalty to Allah is stronger than your need for people's approval. This is the very essence of faith. Choosing Allah, even if it means losing society, and knowing that His pleasure is worth more than all the applause in the world. Sometimes the loneliness of a believer comes with tears, with a sense of longing for companionship, and with the weight of feeling out of place. But those tears are not wasted. Each tear shed in the remembrance of Allah is more valuable than the laughter of thousands in heedlessness. Each longing for righteous company is answered by Allah through the promise of meeting the prophets, the righteous, and the martyrs in the hereafter. Each moment of feeling out of place in this world is a reminder that this world is not our final home. The true home of the believer is Jannah, where there is no loneliness, no rejection, no isolation, only eternal companionship with those who loved Allah above all else. Even in this world, Allah provides comfort to those who feel alone for His sake. He places tranquility in their hearts. He sends moments of ease in their solitude, and He allows them to taste the sweetness of Iman that no worldly gathering can replace. The Prophet said that there are people who will be shaded by Allah on the Day of Judgment, and among them are those who remembered Allah in solitude, with tears streaming from their eyes. That moment of loneliness, that night when no one was there but Allah, becomes a source of honor on the greatest day of all. This shows that what looks like emptiness to the world is fullness in the sight of Allah. What feels like rejection from people is actually selection by Allah for His closeness. The reality is that a believer will never be truly alone as long as Allah is with them. The Qur'an tells us that Allah is closer than our jugular vein, that He knows what is whispered in the heart before it is spoken. He listens when you call upon Him. He responds when you raise your hands in dua. He comforts when your heart feels heavy, and He strengthens when your patience is tested. This closeness is not felt by those who immerse themselves in heedlessness, but it is tasted by those who choose to walk away from sin, even if it leaves them standing apart. Their solitude becomes a sanctuary, their quiet moments become filled with light, and their sense of separation from society becomes the very bridge that brings them closer to their Creator. So when a believer feels alone, they should remember that their loneliness is not abandonment, but elevation. It is Allah's way of separating them from what harms their soul, and bringing them into His special care. The companionship of Allah outweighs the companionship of the entire world, and one moment of His closeness is more precious than a lifetime of worldly acceptance. The struggle of feeling alone is real, but within that struggle lies the sweetness of knowing that Allah has chosen you to walk a path not many are willing to walk. A path that may feel empty to the eyes of the world, but is filled with light in the eyes of Allah.